This is a request from Graham Cox.
So this is happy hour, huh?
Yeah, only if you talk fast.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Dr. Graham Cox. I live at 1213 George Street in Sebastian. I've lived in the county for 9 years. One of the disadvantages for you to have a long day like this is that as we sit and talk and listen to people talk, there are more things that should be on the list to raise with you. So I started out with 3 and we've now got to 5. So this will prolong the discussion if you're willing to do it. I want to emphasize something that several speakers have said today. You should know I got a Ph.D. in ecological economics, and one of the basic rules of ecological economics is to do what everybody has said today: do no harm, exercise the precautionary principle, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We don't know enough, and as Dr. Topacek said, we don't know enough about a lot of this stuff, so why do something that is rash and regret it later? So I urge you, think carefully about what the precautionary principle will mean in this instant. That's item number 1. And item number 2, we are urging people who are here today to write to the Corps before the 21st of October and object. We don't know at this stage whether they only want to hear science or whether they want to hear opinion. But we're going to cover all our bets and make sure that they hear from as many people as we can, so that they do know that this is a controversial issue. I'm sure they do, but they need to know it again and again. Third thing I want to say, I was curious when you decided to go ahead on the 16th with moving funds from the boat registration fees to fund part of this project. What else can you use those monies for? And if you bear with me, I'm going to just read you a little bit from what I discovered from the rules. Boat registration fees and other related boating fees, for example, could be better spent on pollution research and fisheries studies, on fish stocking, on dolphin and manatee protection, on boat access facilities elsewhere in the county, or on boater education. So if you feel that you are rich and you've got $1 million to spare out of the $300 million county budget, it doesn't go a long way to a lot of those things, but it certainly goes some way. So there is a place to spend the money if you're considering what to do with it. I took a look also at the third topic, at just what the 3 federal agencies, the Corps of Engineers, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and EPA had to say back in 2010 and 2011. I know the attorney will leap up and say things have changed since then, so yeah, it's fine and dandy. But these are statements that frankly make you stop and think, and this goes back to the precautionary principle. The U.S. Department of the Army, August 26, 2011, said, by letter dated June 29, 2011, the Fish and Wildlife Service determined that the proposed project would result in the incidental take of manatee. In addition, the project does not appear to be consistent with the Indian River County Manatee Protection Plan. The incidental take of manatees cannot be authorized at this time due to the requirements of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. We're back to the issue of he said, she said, and it always gets down. But here's a federal agency, Fish and Wildlife Service, saying with the plans before them, it contravened the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They concluded by saying, accordingly, it's been determined that your project is contrary to the overall public interest and would result in the incidental take of manatees. Therefore, the permit is denied. So here we are. We're still talking about it. They said you can't have it. But there's this dispute over whether the manatees are or are not covered by this particular modification to it. The Department of the Army, March 3, 2011. It appears that the proposed work in wetlands, surface water impacts associated with widening Oslo Road can be avoided by using alternate surface or maintaining the existing width of the roadway. So there are alternatives to what is being proposed here. This is not something that should be said, this is all it is, and we're going to do this, and that's it. The Department of the Army, January 11th, 2011. The Corps recommends the project be modified to avoid and minimize impacts to the Indian River and aquatic resources as follows. Eliminate the widening and paving of Oslo Road. Eliminate the storm water pond from within the aquatic resource. Eliminate the parking and all other proposed improvements, and they give some specific locations, but essentially it's on the west side of the site. Reduce the dredging in the Indian River to remove only muck sediments with a maximum dredge depth of 2.3 feet below mean low water. Propose a small pervious parking area with minor wetland impacts on the south side of Oslo Road, and finally reslope Oslo Road on the cul-de-sac away from Indian River. There are alternatives to what you're proposing, and they're laid out in the Army Corps of Engineers, and I think there's a lot of room for discussion here so that we can start looking at some of those things and move it in a direction that maybe folks in here can say, well, yeah, we can go with it. U.S. Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, January the 18th, 2011. They listed the impacted, threatened and endangered species that will be impacted, and we've discussed fish at some length today, but they include in the wood stork, the eastern indigo snake, the Atlantic salt marsh snake, and the West Indian manatee. And to quote, seagrass surveys have indicated that there is greater than 10% seagrass coverage in the ingress and egress pathways of this project site at approximately 2.25 to 2.5 feet. We're back to the point that Dr. David Cox made over how do you measure seagrass? 10%, 1%, 15%? It seems to be something of a crapshoot, but it seems to me that when you get such definitive kind of statements in a U.S. Department of Interior document, then you better pay attention. It says the Fish and Wildlife Service anticipates an increase in vessel size, increased capacity of the trailer parking, and resultant vessel traffic and increased depth of the ingress-egress channel. Therefore, these anticipated modifications are contrary to the Manatee Protection Plan. The proposed work does not meet the exception defined in the Manatee Protection Plan. The proposed action is inconsistent with the Manatee Protection Plan. They're pretty insistent. It doesn't meet the plan's requirements. The proposed action is reasonably certain to result in the take of manatees in the form of additional deaths and injuries. The service is unable to issue an incidental take permit for manatees. They said some more. They said dense seagrass meadows occur immediately adjacent to the proposed channel dredging area and occur in the shallow portions of the vessel traffic corridor east of the dredging footprint. Because of the important ecological functions, Fish and Wildlife Service considers the orca mangroves and adjacent seagrasses aquatic resources of national importance. This is strong stuff. And I haven't seen yet in what you've explained as this new project that they really have dealt head-on with those issues. U.S. EPA last thing, November 8th, 2010. I don't mean it's the real last thing, but the last thing on this list. EPA finds that this project may have substantial and unacceptable adverse impacts on the aquatic resources of national importance. Therefore, we recommend denial of the project as currently proposed. That's an awful lot of letters saying you better not do it, or come up with a better plan and modifications to that plan. You have a dilemma. We have a dilemma. And this is where I've added a couple of things that struck me as I sat here and watched the process. I spent a good deal of my professional life before I retired training two untrainable groups of people, engineers and foresters. Training engineers in public participation. Engineers are usually convinced that what they have defined as a problem is the problem, and that what they're going to do is going to be a benefit to everybody and his brother. Getting DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation Engineers in New York State, to realize that what they were doing might be wonderful, but they better follow some very basic steps before they decide they're going to do something. Step one is define the problem. Really define the problem. Not define the problem like this, but define the problem like this. And then zero in. Then you look at the alternatives, and you look at the pros and cons of the alternatives, and then you make a decision. Is what we want to do on balance, in balance, better than the no alternative, better than the alternative of doing nothing. And I don't think, frankly, we've gone through that as a community on this particular site. And I recommend that we give that a shot. I know it's late in the game, but it's worth thinking about it in those terms. The other thing I've spent a lot of time on, and it's a subject of my thesis, was a thing called multi-criteria decision analysis. This is a way of trying to make sense out of a lot of data with a lot of scenarios and a lot of options, a lot of actions that you could take, but no clear decision to make. It involves a lot of stakeholders. It involves a lot of indicator kind of data. It involves several scenarios, and the more you have, the more confusing it gets. But there is a way around the problems that you've been listening to all day today. There's a lot of disagreement. We can't say that this is a great solution in terms of should we expand the dock, should we look at the bigger picture. But there's a way of going about this and tackling this problem in a methodical way using multi-criteria decision analysis. And if anybody wants to go through it with me, I'd be happy to do it. We could be here for several hours, but I'd be happy to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd.